of Cycling and Society Symposium. My name's Harry and I work at the University of Salford. I'm very happy to be chairing this session on Cycling for All, as everybody that knows me knows that that's what I talk about 90% of the time. So I'm sorry if I repeat things for people that have been in the previous sessions, but just to make sure that everybody's kind of on board with what's going on. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to have a look at the presentations online for this session. And then what we'll do in this session is I'll introduce each of the panelists and give them 1 minute to kind of go through their main 2 or 3 points of their presentation, as well as give their name and affiliation. And then we'll go to a deeper chat with kind of all of the audience and the panelists. There's a bit of echo. I don't know if, yeah, maybe someone can switch off their microphone, I think it is, if possible. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. So just for some housekeeping, there's the chat, which is at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So on there, if you want to ask a question, if you just put Q before it, so it's easier to for us to realise that it's a question and we can ask that. Also, please do put comments. There's been some really nice discussions in that chat box. If you don't want the noise coming up, it might come up with a notification sound. You can click on the spiky wheel thing and switch off the notification settings. We have a hashtag which is C8S2020. And I think that's it in terms of housekeeping. So, also we have the Zoom social at 5 o'clock. So if you, I think that's gone out on an email. Is that right? And maybe it'll go in the chat as well. So if you want to join that, come along. So I think we can start now. So I'll go to my speaker view. If I go stop sharing. Yeah. So I'll go around and ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So Esther and Robert, you can kind of coordinate yourselves if you want to go first.
Thanks so much, Harry. Yeah, I'll briefly introduce, and then I'll also call Robert to complement whatever I share. So yeah, very briefly, this all started in a Twitter exchange that I had about basically the invisibility of some cyclists, specific groups of cyclists. This is something that we've been discussing in the symposium already. And this is because of power relations existing in cycling, but also in other systems, economic, social, etc. So it's not even only a question of intersectionality, but it's a systemic issue. And it has to do with context as well, that we have also discussed quite a bit in the previous sessions. So Robert and I were sharing our discomfort as researchers facing these situations and trying to design research, or even better, co-design research with our objects of research, who are human beings, and trying to deal with these inequalities. So of this discomfort, we shared some readings together that were really, really helpful, and I'll pass it to Robert in case he wants to highlight as well.
Yeah, hi, my name is Robbie Egan, and I'm from Green Skills Travel. And yeah, I think Esther covered anything I would have wanted to say, really. And I guess that we were actually, the whole title was reflexive practice, or the value of reflexive practice in cycling research. And actually, me and Esther, in producing this presentation, engaged in reflexive practice. And that was a very insightful process for us in our own work, and also reflecting more broadly. So, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Hannah?
Yeah, I think the microphone is on now. Hello. First of all, thank you so much for your invitation. My name is Hannah, and my contribution is the voiceover presentation called Streets Could Be Our Main Stage, the appropriation of street space by bike. in which I discussed the critical mass movement and the domination of street space by cars. The empirical research was done during a one-year research project in 2018 titled Die Straße, ein Stadtraum in Bewegung, The Street, an Urban Space in Motion, which was part of the master's program in European Ethnology at the University of Graz in Austria. So I'm actually a master's student and currently writing my master's thesis. Yeah, please keep in mind that I'm rather new to this topic of cycling. But yeah, critical mass rides are collective spontaneous bicycle rides through the city. They first occurred in 1992 and are now present in nearly all Western cities. And my research question was, how does the critical mass movement transform street space by appropriating it in an alternative way? And I'm of street space through the lens of Johanna Roelshoven's spatial triad, which consists of the space of representation, the experienced space, and the materialized space. And I used an ethnographic method called participant observation and took part in critical mass rides. I was able to do interviews with 6 participants, and I found that they criticize each of the 3 aspects of the spatial triad. And this criticism then ultimately leads to the appropriation of the street by the critical mass movement and thus a change of street space. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Hannah. Alejandro, did you want to introduce yourself?
Of course.
Thank you.
So, I'm Alejandro, so the invitation. And I'm a PhD student at Drexel University, and soon to be, I will, in October, I will also be a PhD student at Paris. So I will be doing a dual degree, which is really cool. So my presentation is about the social gatherings of bike activists in France and in North America. And so the first thing, there are a couple of things that I wanted to cover. One question that is of interest to me is the question of knowledge legitimacy. What type of knowledge is legitimate to create public policies? And a lot of the time, and you've seen it in a lot of the works that have been presented in this symposium, it's about numbers and about quantitative data. But you can also do, I think that you can also do public policy based on this type of creative approaches of visual ethnography and mobile methods, the mobile methods of critical mobilities, which is why I decided to go with video and filming while moving, literally while riding by the wall. It happened that and this is just serendipity, that the places where the gatherings happened were in cities that are on the border. So Tijuana in Mexico, the border with the US and San Diego, and Strasbourg in France, the border with Germany. And it creates a nice contrast between what happens when you have an open border and a closed border. And this is all mediated by the bike. So on one, you get to cross the bridge and go and party on the other side of the Rhine, and the European Union is paying for the festivities. And on the other hand, you have the whole struggle of going through a landscape that is completely dominated and created for automobility, and you have to get off your bike and cross. And there are different status where you come from south of the wall, or you come from north of the wall, you're Canadian or American, versus if you're Mexican or any other Latin American citizenship. It creates a lot of contrasts. And then the other thing is how to mediate knowledge. And mediating knowledge means also, so something that I did not say is that I'm a bike activist, and I'm actually on the board of Le Recyclage, which is the network of bike co-ops in France. We present more than 100 workshops, and we have more than 50,000 members within our network of workshops. Oh, and you saw one presentation, the presentation of Margot Dabord de Chatillon, which she's actually a board member of one of the workshops. So it's also about how you can use this type of objects to create a sense of belonging, that we all belong together in this community of cyclists and bike activists promoting alternative types of mobilities and alternative lifestyles. And so objects mediate. So a presentation, what I'm doing right here is mediate between that world of activists and the world of the ivory tower. But also, what I was doing in Tijuana when I was presenting as a member of Le Recyclage or as a member of other bike collectives that I was representing that were based in Los Angeles, is mediating that type of knowledge that actually, with the political goal of furthering the cause of bike activism and alternative mobilities. So that is what my work is about. We can't listen to Harry. I think she's talking.
Sorry, I don't think Rosemary's arrived. So, Nikki, did you want to introduce yourself?
Working.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Working. Yeah, okay.
Do you want to the camera, Nikki? Sorry, because you're a bit intermittent.
Looks like you've got quite a poor signal, Nikki.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Try again now.
Okay. That's better.
Much better.
Okay. Yeah, so hi everyone. Great to be involved in the symposium again this year. I'm in the early stages of doing a PhD at Lancaster University, where I'm working in the area of art and mobilities. So I'm exploring how I can apply my skills and experience from 15 years of participatory arts practice to explore what shape a community bike hub could be if it was designed with and for trans people, non-binary people, and allied women. So setting that up in contrast to the usual white, cisgendered, able-bodied, reasonably affluent men that seem to be at the centre of much of UK cycling scenes. Within that, I'm very much interested in the community of the bike hub and how support networks, agency, and engaged citizenship spider out from that. And recently I've just started using a suite of badges to help animate conversations in the screen-based focus groups I'm running to try and seed connections and community building, just in lieu of some of the in-person approaches that I'd normally use. Already it's been really interesting to see how much people's responses overlap and resonate, and also just sort of how gentle people have been in holding space for different opinions as well. And my aim is to try and find a way of carrying that forward into any in-person gatherings that I'm hoping we'll be able to find a way to make happen soonish. It's been really useful for me as well, just sort of like from a market research or needs analysis kind of point of view, for really being able to see the ways that the network can make a meaningful contribution. So that's been really useful, and some interesting things from like a more methodological point of view, just sort of fascinating watching strangers come together for the first time and then rapidly build up shared meaning attached to each of the badges, so that someone can just kind of hold up a badge mid-sentence, not have to verbalize anything, but there's all this sort of shared understanding between the group. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Great, thank you very much, Nikki. So if we start to have a discussion now, I can start it off with a question, and then if people want to add some questions into the group chat, that would be excellent. So my question is that everybody in here seems to be quite academic activist and making cycling accessible for all. But I was thinking also about the spaces within which that activism happens as well have to be inclusive. So I think, Alejandro, you were talking about this in terms of groups kind of being north and south of the wall, and Nikki, yours in terms of inclusive spaces. So I was just wondering about kind of the methods and processes you use to make sure that your activist spaces are inclusive as well. Who would like to start? Alejandro?
Yeah, I can start. So for me, that is a question, and it's. I'm gonna start by the part that I think that I already figured out, which is I I think there are two dimensions. One is a question of identity, and that is a tricky thing. So about identity, I am lucky when I'm working in North America or in Europe. So I'm Colombian, but I grew up life in France and in Switzerland, and so I feel at ease and at home. I feel as much as home in France and in Switzerland that I feel in Colombia. And what happens is that because of my identity, I get access to a lot of spaces. So for instance, when I'm in North America, I am Hispanic. I have a thick Hispanic accent, and nobody asks. For them, I'm just another Hispanic and a brown person. And that makes me legitimate in spaces reserved for people of color. So that is the kind of access that I get. And when I'm in France or in Switzerland, the advantage that I have is that it's difficult to put me in a box, so they cannot tell. So this is a question of race, and in France, it is a question of more like social class. So they cannot tell if I'm French or not. They cannot tell if I'm Swiss or not. They cannot tell if I'm working class or if I'm bourgeois. And so at that moment, I get to talk to everybody, and I get to participate with everybody. It becomes more tricky so for instance, I'm a cis male, and when I get to interact with people with gender minorities, then the first thing that I have to do is to gain their trust. And usually I gain their trust by showing that I'm committed to the cause. And being committed to the cause is, for instance, doing this type of work and letting, in a way, this question of letting their voices speak. And one of the things that images and videos that were lended to me by 7 participants of Argentina, Mexico, France, the US, some queer people, some basically people from different types of identities. And they do this because they trust that I'm going to use their visual materials to further the cause to which we're all committed. So for me, that is the thing, the key thing about identity. But then the other thing is about.
Can I just go to the other participants, just because we don't have too much time, so I want to make sure everyone.
Sorry.
Esther and Robert, I think your presentation went into this as well a bit.
Yes, thank you. We provide a few examples in the presentation, and Robert provides really nice examples regarding gender issues that he encountered while doing interviews to women. So I recommend people go to the presentation because there are a few examples there, but I'd like to raise one issue and then I would pass it on to Robert if he has anything to add. But one thing that we discovered in our discussions is that language is really important, and sometimes we would recall from participants themselves saying, oh, the language you use, we don't feel comfortable about it, can you please change this word or these other words? So for example, I personally was doing some research in Spanish, and in Spanish, the masculine is the neutral gender. So every time we talk in general, we talk in masculine. So that was actually quite uncomfortable for some women, and they let us know. So we had to change all the language in all the research design that we were using, and we were doing interviews and non-participatory observation as well. So we had to be very careful not to offend the participants. So I think that sensitivity is very important. Yeah, I don't know if Robert wants to add on the gender aspect as well.
Yeah, sure. And so I guess like I'm from the most privileged group that you can be in, basically in cycling research and also more generally. So trying to be reflexive is something that's absolutely imperative for me to create research that has integrity, and as well in order to protect participants and not increase or exacerbate existing power relations that may be that may create all sorts of problems with cycling and in terms of social justice as well. So doing research like at the moment with young women and teenage girls, looking at the gender cycling gap in Ireland, cycling to school in particular, and also in my PhD work as well, doing interviews with women. It was very important for me to try to, and also very uncomfortable for me at times as well, and difficult to grapple with, for me to really think about how I'm going to be perceived, how I may come across, how what kinds of power I might have as someone who's carrying out interviews and focus groups, how I might ask questions that might be insensitive or is kind of naive to the lived experience of these particular groups. So I suppose just talking about coming back to reflexivity, for me, it was very important to reflect on that before going into, like, for example, focus group situations with teenage girls, and also interviews with women, and really reflect on my own views and my own kind of potential prejudices or my own naiveties and lack of knowledge and ignorance to certain things, as well as reflecting on my experiences with, for example, with the teenage girl research, problems to do with teenage boys is an emergent pattern, you know. So, and also in research, problems with men too. So me being someone who's asking questions about this as a man creates certain tensions in the focus group situation. So for me, really thinking about that, showing that I'm someone who's willing to listen, who's willing to build a relationship and not jump in or not be part of the problem, was really essential and challenging.
Great. And then Nikki and Hannah, is there anything that you'd like to add and say?
Hannah, do you want to go first?
It doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to say that, like, when I started researching about the critical mass, I had this assumption that it's a pretty much male-dominated movement, and I wanted to include as many different persons as possible. But when I actually took part in critical mass rights, I realized that that's not the case, and there were a lot of women, maybe even more women than men. And I mean, yeah, the critical mass is a pretty open movement for everyone. There are kids, there are people of all ages, a lot of queer people, and so on. But there are mostly white and able-bodied persons. And so ultimately the question I asked myself was, how can we make the critical mass more inclusive? Because in my opinion, there really lack some groups of persons, and I wonder why they might feel uncomfortable to take part in a critical mass. So yeah.
Thanks. And Nikki?
Hi. Yeah. So I guess with me, I'm in a sort of a nice chewy situation where I've kind of pledged my approach to inclusivity sort of like center stage, but I'm finding myself like there's a real job that needs doing, especially in the time of pandemic, of trying to help people get mobile by bicycle, and having to make my own sort of internal ethical wrangles between, do I go for the low hanging fruit and just who can I help now, who can I access, is that the university community, or do I look further afield and am I reaching out for the people who need it more? But as Alejandra sort of indicated earlier, that takes time, that takes trust building. It's a much longer, slower process to do that with integrity, I think. So I've drawn a line around gender, but within that, I also want to make particular effort to hear from people of colour and transgender and non-binary people, but with various things. Not so much now, but we were sort of like in the midst of Pride Month when I first got my ethics clearance to talk to people, and I think still people of colour, and particularly women of colour, are under extra demands for their labour, for their comment and input in response to the increased visibility, in response to racist violence, different areas, and also just sort of women in general taking the extra care burdens on as well. So I'm continuously finding out where I think my lines are and like how hard I'll push to try and ask people to essentially come and help with my art project in the midst of all of this as well. So yeah, it's a constant process of evaluation to figure out what I'm comfortable with and what I can reasonably expect other people to get involved with as well.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And it was the website you provided, kind of talking about what you're doing with the badges, was excellent. I really enjoyed that. So there's a question on the chat about what role might media or creative art practices play in reflecting or representing diversity in cycling. Have you got any thoughts on this? Who'd like
Shall I
to go
jump
first?
in if my mic's still up? Yeah, I think a lot of human stuff boils down to storytelling, which I think can be really powerful. And we've touched upon issues about representation and seeing yourself as a cyclist or seeing people like you riding bikes, and there's different elements of stigma or not attached to that to work around as well. But also I'm interested in pushing past this idea of the arts having a role of illustrating stuff, of representing stuff, and I'm interested in what work the art can do sort of methodologically as well, and what change can actually be made to happen through the art up front. So I'll leave that there as a return provocation.
Anyone got a response or a thought? Esther, you're smiling.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I know that question was in regard of participants, but what if we apply that question to researchers? What can we do more creatively or through media or through artistic practice to improve diversity in our research? I don't have the answer, but I was just formulating the question to myself. Yeah. I mean, in my case, yeah, that question came because in my case, my creativity was more in terms of exploring different types of relating to people and trying to explore trust and sensitivity and their needs, explore their needs in the proper way, and then coming up with sensitive ways of doing it, creative ways of doing it, and even finding, third persons who could help and support in that exploration. For example, in one particular instance, I had to recruit participants that were learning to cycling for adults. And then I interviewed the person who was picking up the phone, and that was a gold mine, really. And that was like, oh, who can tell me about this? No, I spoke to this person when I was paying for the courses, and she was really helpful. And I was like, okay, I'm interviewing her. And that was really a source of very valuable information, for example. So being creative and open, specifically open in that sense, yeah. But I don't know if there probably are, and maybe Nikki has already explored that, thinking about last year's symposium and how she offered us an activity that we could explore as well. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Hannah or Alejandro, did you have anything to say? I know, Alejandro, you were talking about kind of the importance of qualitative methods in cycling research.
So for me, it's more about how you mediate the experience there is a question about what I mean by the cause that I will answer later if the opportunity arises. But you can use objects to mediate the experience. And so I remember it was a video, I think it was filmed in Lyon. And I think the actress who filmed it, I think her name is Clémence, about a workshop reserved for women and non-binary people. And you can just see the energy. It's a completely different energy about people like women and non-binary people learning to fix their bikes and having their own space. And it's completely different, the type of experience that you can have. I don't get to access that experience. I just get to see it through a video. And the other thing is that objects, so you can create symbolism around objects. And so in North America is the symbolism of white bikes. Whenever there is a dead cyclist because of car-based violence. And then you have all of this symbolism and all of this, the community gathers around the symbol, and sometimes those symbols attract the attention of media. And then you can try to frame the story of this car-based violence in a different way than the usual depictions of car-based violence.
And Hannah, did you have anything to add on top of that? I have it's kind of drawing on what we've talked about, as well as previous sessions, and it's about the language we use as well, and how important the language is for inclusiveness. So one of the things that I noticed, for example, in the UK and especially on Twitter, is that cycle activists are often referred to as the cycle lobby, but the cycle lobby, it produces this image of the white male lycra clad cyclist, and actually there's a pretty sexist term to be using, because as you said, Hannah, there is a lot of people involved, a lot of women involved in cycle activism, and by using this term, you're not only kind of creating this vision, but you're excluding all of their labor. And another one would be kind of using cycle rather than bike. So any thoughts that you have in terms of inclusion and language? Is there a volunteer, or shall I?
Yeah, I can definitely comment on the language. I'll keep it short, as I'm speaking all the time. But it's a really particular subject that is dear to me, and I know Cristina Kaimoto is around, and we'll have her in the last session of the symposium tomorrow afternoon. And she mentions the marketing language applied to cycling, and I think that's the case that you were just mentioning, Harriet. The word lobby is more linked to marketing and that kind of language, and I think there is a risk of associating cycling with all this marketing language, because it also links it to another great thing that we are discussing. We've been discussing in the previous session, is the capitalist neoliberal discourse and those spheres that are crawling around, and we have to take them into account. And one of the ways of spotting that we are slipping into one of these spheres is the language. So I think it's very important to keep an eye on that.
Alejandro, I saw that I think you had something as well.
Yes, so I did cover a little bit of language on my video. That's because the event in Tijuana, there was an organization from Los Angeles composed of mainly Chicano, Chicanx, I don't know how to say that. So Mexican Americans, and their commitment is to language justice, and so to use inclusive language both in Spanish and in English, and to do simultaneous translation and interpretation from English to Spanish. So what happened to me during that time is that, for instance, I would be presenting something that was written in French, speaking either in Spanish or in English, depending on the person that was asking me a question, while people from this community from Mantena Los Angeles was translating and interpreting simultaneously. And that is a question that arose. So right now, the Foro Mundial de la Bicicleta, which is one of the big bike conferences in Latin America, is due to happen in Nepal. And the issue in Nepal is that you have to translate from Nepali and other Asian languages, and also because this comes from Latin America, there's a whole issue of how you're going to have this virtual event and get everybody to understand each other. And so that is a question of language justice.
Great. Robert, did you have anything to add on this?
Sorry, yeah. On language, I off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that's significant to say. Yeah, sorry.
Nikki or Hannah?
Yeah, language is something that's perpetually sort of evolving from my project. I've been through about 3 or 4 different iterations of that kind of description of who it's for. Saying it's a women's cycling group just doesn't cut it for me. North American groups quite often use WTF for women, trans and femme, or FTW, femme, trans. But I think there's some disagreement about what femme is to different cultures, different things to trans community, different things to queer community. So I kind of stepped away from that because I didn't feel confident in describing the terms myself. And then more recently, just switching things around. So instead of saying women, trans and non-binary people, putting trans and non-binary first, and then specifying that it's allied women, and really specifying a code of conduct and setting out those expectations about what acceptable behaviour is. And then, yeah, just in my writing, I mean, we've mentioned it, and I think in perhaps the comments for all the other sessions so far, mobility lanes rather than cycle lanes. Got a big thing about verbs, not nouns, coming from like different project areas I've been working on before. But you know, the flip side of that, of course, is reporting in the media, where you know it's costing people lives for not having the agency really kind of spelled out about who crashed into who. Yeah, it's worth wrangling over quite a lot, and I think the more I speak to the different communities that I'm talking about, I'm expecting it to keep on changing as well.
Great. I'm very glad that mobility lanes is taking off now.
Yeah.
Being using that.
Definitely.
I was just thinking about how this language then influences practice, if anybody has reflections on that. So in terms of a lot of policy focuses on like a two-wheel cycle, for example, and what you get, the materiality of what's implemented is then kind of narrow, very narrow based on that. So whether anyone had any reflections or experience of that, perhaps in also critical mass as well, Nikki, you were saying about kind of there's not many disabled cyclists who are involved in that.
Well, I've just posted an example on the chat actually of using the word cycle instead of the word bicycle, and returning to Wheels for Wellbeing as a reference, and their campaign that was called Beyond the Bicycle, in what we should take into account not regular bicycles, but other bicycles, other cycles as well. So as you see, I'm struggling because we're so used to talk about the bicycle all the time, that I have to read and reread and rethink what I'm saying all the time, because I want to be inclusive. But that is the place where I want to be. That is the place where I might make mistakes. But it's time for us to throw ourselves out there. And if we make mistakes, just say sorry and try again.
Can I just add something there as well, actually? Yeah, just like, the problems about me even framing a study from the perspective of cycling and gender, and then like doing research, for example, with teenage girls, girls, I'm using something that I'm not talking about non-binary people. I'm not including that in my considerations, and how does that affect who will come forward and talk, same doing my PhD and like looking for men and women and noticing that like when I was putting my recruitment advertisement out, no women were coming back to me, but once again, no during that period, no consideration for non-binary people and other genders, and just once again, it's something awkward, it's uncomfortable, and it's something that is tricky to kind of. It's something you continually learn about and make mistakes about, and only through doing so will you actually learn, I suppose. And that's the real challenge and the discomfort, and where the reflexivity comes in, I guess. Making mistakes, trying, and also being humble in the process, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Nikki? Oh, sorry, Hannah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to say I think that it is really important to make us feel uncomfortable, and but also to maybe call other people out, or to accept it when people call us out, and change for the better and apologize, because mistakes happen. And I think language is an important part, but I think we also have to think about when it comes to conversations or discussions with less privileged persons, because, for example, in a lot of discussions, males talk a lot more than females, or yeah, there could be a lot of other examples. But I think maybe we as researchers have to listen more and sometimes talk less. And a few days ago I saw a nice illustration that describes it very well. There is a woman and a man sitting on the table, and the man tells the woman, "Let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence." And I think that this is very true and can be applied to other conversations as well. Yeah, that's just something I wanted to throw in.
Alejandro, did you have anything to add?
Yes, but it's so my beyond the use of language into the terrain of symbolism.
Mhm.
And it's more about North America. The issue of invisible cyclists and who gets to represent them. So invisible cyclists, minorities, people of color, and undocumented people that use cycles because that is all that they can afford, or because they've had some interaction with police. And this is the way of, they literally try to be as invisible as they can, which a lot of the time means that they will adopt behaviors on the road that are really dangerous for them. But also, who is representing them? These are not the people that you get to see in city councils or in organizations that do advocacy work. And that is a key a key issue. And the other one is this idea of what the bike means. And so I think it's Melody Hoffman who talks of rolling signifiers. And so where for a segment of population, high income, highly educated, urban population, bikes are seen, and I quote Hoffman and Lugo, which talk about creative class bait. So this is, I bike because I'm cool, I have a hipster bike. For other people, for these low-income people, this is the only option that they have. And if they could upgrade from that to transit, they would. And if they could upgrade from transit to having a car, especially in Los Angeles, and I talk about Los Angeles because the work that I did for my master thesis was in Los Angeles, they would too. And this is because of the stigma of these types of mobility. So bikes are for poor people and transit is for poor people, and I will have a car. And so it goes beyond language. You have to go into what the bike means for people.
Yeah, and I think that talking about cost of cycles as well is very interesting, because I think it goes back to other discussions we've had around kind of people looking or sport cycling and very high cost bikes. But actually there's this whole range of cycles and secondhand cycles, and sometimes they're actually better if you're doing everyday cycling, because I think, was it Robbie that mentioned this, that actually a cheaper cycle for everyday cycling is better because you can just chain it up anywhere and you don't worry about it. So just thinking about whether income has kind of come up in other conversations that you've had in your cycling research.
Sorry, were you addressing that to me, Harry?
Any of you, really.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry.
Esther, do you, or?
Actually, I think I didn't hear that very well. Can you repeat, please, Harriet?
Just thinking about the kind of the costs and low income groups, and that often there's kind of this aspiration for a car or a more expensive cycle because that's what we see in shops. But in many cases, it's kind of a secondhand cycle is actually better for these everyday journeys. So just whether you'd come across kind of income differences in cycling research, or whether anyone had looked into this specifically.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I completely agree with what Alejandro was saying about the invisible cyclist, and I would like to argue that it's not only in the what we call global south, but also in the global north, with all the quotes that you want, because it's very relative, everything. But even in European cities, in some neighborhoods, we find these cases of people who are invisible, they're using very cheap bikes, or in metropolitan areas where the infrastructure is really not ready for cycling, but they have to use a bicycle to maybe go to an industrial estate where they work, or food industries related, at least in my country, in Spain, I've seen it. and they have to park in the worst conditions, and they have the worst bicycles and the worst infrastructure, and they're the most exposed to, for example, road unsafety. So I think it is visibly, it is something that it's happening everywhere, and we need not only, I don't think we need the tools, we need to start to integrate that in the data somehow. And some people, I think, in the chat were mentioning it's always from the point of researchers, yeah, because we are the ones making this reflection. But these reflections come from trying to use these different tools of participatory research, of actually talking to the participants and saying, you know, what would you like us to be asking you? What do you think we're missing out? And make them participants of how we're constructing research. It takes time and it takes resources, but I think it's something that we need to integrate in our research projects.
Yeah, and I was wondering, Hannah, whether you came up with this in your research, just because you were saying about disabled cyclists with critical mass, and also cost for disabled cyclists. So I'm a disabled cyclist, and I've recently bought a trike, but they're the price of a small car. So kind of thinking about inclusion for disabled people also goes beyond just the types of cycles that disabled people need, but also the cost of those cycles is well beyond anything you could kind of walk into the local cycle shop and get.
That's true, and I think yeah, it's a really important topic, and something that I have experienced lately is that with this cycle boom here in Austria and everywhere because of COVID, I find that second-hand bikes went so much up in price and have gotten so much more expensive lately. For example, in comparison to a year ago, it's really interesting how this bike boom affects that too. And yeah, it's we have to think about how can we make bikes more accessible to everyone. But yeah, I don't know.
Has anyone else got any comments?
There's some interesting chat in the comments about labels and who's applying them to whom, and yeah, kind of how that might be kind of reinforcing dominant positions and things like that. I think that might be interesting to pick up on. I think we've got 10 minutes left or something.
I've missed that, Nikki. Could you explain it a bit more, if possible?
I think it was Claudio. Invisible cyclists are a great example of a term that migrant, low-income, and brown-black people did not come up with themselves. I think there was something in there as well about the appropriateness or not of using labels like BAME and sort of reducing people down to acronyms and things like that.
Okay, yeah, I've noticed this as well. So one example is in the UK, if you're disabled, you would generally identify as disabled person, disabled people. And then I've noticed as well, but I mean, that one, there's also a difference between the UK and the US, for example. But who was it? Alejandro was using the term invisible cyclist. So where did that term kind of come from?
Okay, so I did, and you can help me. That is something that I still don't have a definitive answer. There is a thesis by Jesus Barajas, which is right now he's an assistant professor at UC Davis, on which he talks of invisible cyclists. And when I was doing my master thesis, I looked on the different sources, and the first mention that I found was in a journal article. I can't remember the source. I think it was Bicyclist or something like that, from 2010. And it is from the point of view of a cycle advocate that is looking at a person that is cycling all the time, but is not being represented. So the term, I would as by not the people that is supposed to represent. But for me, what I think is more important, and this is a question that I have no answer for, but I think that is a very important question, which is the question of can the subaltern speak? So we say, let's try to be inclusive, but can we really be inclusive? Is that possible? Can we get them to speak? Do you understand what I mean? I'm not even sure that is possible. I know that we have to try, but I'm not sure if that is possible.
Does anyone want to comment?
I think it's a very important question, and it's indeed very challenging. We have a saying in Spanish that it never rains for the likes of everyone. So whatever we do, there will be people we will be leaving behind. But at least there's the awareness or the intention of being aware, and then there can be negotiation. If there's no awareness and they're just invisible, you're not planning for them, you're not doing anything for them. But if you're aware you're leaving them behind, maybe you could come up with other policies that support these other people for cycling. But yeah, I think for me it's the awareness, and this awareness can be collecting data, showing some interest, being open, doing cooperative research, participatory research, democratic planning, all that stuff that we know takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but we need to get our hands on that. I think it's time for us to count on that. And when I say that, I say we've been used to design projects for maybe grants or for, even the grants are designed so that that kind of part is not included. There is no budget for that. And that is a very important part. And for the last years, both in my career as a consultant and as a researcher, I am struggling to find that space to be able to do that. And I think we have to fight for that. We have to count for that. Yeah.
There's a really good comment from Angela about councils talking about hard to reach groups, but actually is the council working hard enough to reach those groups? So as everyone's kind of a researcher in this panel, it would be interesting to hear about the methods you use of participant recruitment to try and reach these kind of hard to reach people. Did you want to comment on that one first, Nikki? I think that your research on your webpage, did it start with talking about this a bit?
Maybe. I mean, I've sort of been in a house by myself with no one else for like, I don't know, however long it's been now. So yeah, my usual approach would be to get out there face to face and start building relationships with people. I don't like the way that emailing people sort of turns into kind of making demands early on. I think there's got to be it's got to be a bit of courting first of all, getting to know each other and figuring out what's what. So I've only recently, got my ethics clearance and stuff like that to actually start communicating with people. I don't know. Some of it's strategic, and some of it's just these little encounters that crop up. Yeah, I don't know. It's all a bit of a swirl. I'm trying to sort of navigate my way through that. I'm not happy with what I've done so far. I'd like to work harder at that, but it is finding the right people to talk to. It's in the sort of the situation where I am at the moment. So I'm new in the city, so I'm having to build relationships from scratch, but simultaneously everything's online at the moment. So how relevant is geography? But yeah, I think gatekeepers and speaking to people who are already working in those areas is key, I think. I started trying to type a comment earlier in response to something about like not talking about groups, but giving them the voice to speak about themselves. I think it kind of connects into that for me, is like, amplifying what's going on already instead of sort of coming in, striding out from the ivory tower and sort of like, trying to sort of put a spin on it yourself. So yeah, still working on that.
There's I think I shared it in one of the past sessions, but it's by Kay Inkle, and it's a journal article, and she talks to disabled cyclists, and she uses iPoems, which I'd never heard of before, but she really uses them to keep putting forward disabled cyclists' voices in her paper, and it's really actually a very beautiful paper. It's probably the nicest thing I've read. So Esther, did you have anything to say on kind of methods of recruitment?
Yeah.
And Robert as well, sorry.
Yeah. What I found in my experience, it really depends on the dimension of the project. I mean, if it's very big or if it's really micro level, then you might need to use different approaches, because sometimes, you know, to make it participatory, to make it democratic at that level, might imply different tools. So you need to adapt to that. That's one of the things I found. And the other thing I found that it's a bit challenging is, where do you draw the line of research, so academic? So how much of research do you explain to participants who you want to take into account, so that they understand how research works and academia works, for example, about publishing or about a research method that you want to use, and without losing the quality of research. You know, that is, for me, I don't know if I've explained it well, but it's a challenge, because you want to bring people in and you need to explain them a lot of stuff, because academia is a different world and they need to understand. So, but how much of that can you afford to share with them without losing rigor and quality in your research? It's been a bit of a struggle, but I've used, so within a European project that is called Inspires, they were looking for case studies for what they call Science Shop. Science Shop is a Dutch term that it's, I think I explained it in the presentation, so I won't extend very much, but it's just finding a research question with a civic society organization. So, and with them construct what is going to be the research design and which are the objectives and the outcomes that they would like to have. Not only the academic one, but maybe non-academic outcomes that come from translating the evidence into something useful for them. So, and in that case, it was about participatory research, and if you want, participatory action research, because if you're working with an advocacy group, then what you have is advocate action there as well. So yeah, in my experience, that was very valuable, but you had to be very mindful of that kind of dimension of the project, who to get involved, who not, how to map the actors that you want to get involved. And then, as I was saying, the issue of drawing the line of how much of academia and of research you want to share and you can share with the participants. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think Nikki also had a question in the chat about kind of bids and funding time, and that relates as well, because it's also so often so hard to get the funding to do this active action research, because you have to have so much in place before you even apply. So we're getting to the end. Is there any of the participants that want to quickly add something before we finish? Or
I would like to add about this issue of how to recruit. So, and this is from my own situated perspective, which allows me, for me, this is not really an issue because of my activism. So, for instance, when I was in Los Angeles, I was involved with a couple of community organizations. One was Right On, which is in a Black neighborhood, and one was People for Mobility Justice, which is the reason why I decided to move to Philadelphia and be the Mimi Scheller PhD student. And these are organizations serving people of color. And once again, because I'm a person of color and an activist, I fit it there. And from then, I could build trust and start working with them. And in Philadelphia, so there is this bike workshop called Neighborhood Bike Works, and they have so in a Black neighborhood, and they have an Earn a Bike program for teenagers. And what I did was to go there, fix my bike, and then I prepared a presentation about mobility justice and Vision Zero for the bike workshop, and to present that with the kids. And at that moment, you start building trust with the communities that are involved in the community space. So in this case, with the teenagers. And from then, you can start thinking about how do I get this? So this program that is working, how can I use the resources that I can find in academia to support the bike workshop. And by doing that, I'm also creating a terrain where I can do my research. So that's why I mean that from my own situated perspective, that's not really a, but it's just from my perspective. I don't know from anybody else.
We on time, so if we finish there, thank you very much to all of the panelists. That was a really excellent discussion. I enjoyed it very much. We have the social at 5 o'clock. It is an experiment, so we'll see how that goes on Zoom. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, me and Harry. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Oh yeah, join us tomorrow for more sessions. Forgot that bit.